For most people, retirement feels like a mystery number. Is it 500,000? Maybe 1 million? Maybe even more? If you don't know, you'll never feel secure. Today, I'll show you the real maths behind retirement, whether Gen Z and Millennials will actually have access to the state pension in years to come, and how much you'll likely need for retirement in the United Kingdom. Hi, I'm George. I'm a data analyst and investor of 5 years now. I take a data-driven approach to money and have helped hundreds of people with their finances. So firstly, let's talk about the problem with retirement myths. The first one being that you need millions and millions of pounds to retire. This isn't necessarily true. It only depends on how much of the lifestyle you're willing to carry on into your retirement. If you require millions and millions of pounds per year, then you're definitely going to need a big retirement. The second myth is that the state pension will cover me. This isn't really true. The state pension is barely scraping enough for rent and some tiny expenses. You need to both combine your state pension and your personal pension in order to have a nice retirement. In reality, it all boils down to expenses and not just random numbers. So let's talk about the 4% rule and the safe withdrawal rate. So a really common retirement tactic is that if you withdraw 4% of your rate from your pension, your money should last around 30 years. And this is without your original retirement amount actually even going down, or going down in a very, very small percentage. So one of the ways to calculate your pension is to first of all calculate all of your expenses into a monthly basis. So this is taking all things like rent, gas, electric, water, all of your subscriptions if you want to carry that on, and times it by 25. This should be your total retirement pot. Here are some examples. If you have £1 million within your retirement pot, when you hit that retirement age, you should times this by 0.04, and this will give you £40,000 per year. This means that within that £1 million retirement pot, you are withdrawing 4% of that per year. And that means that you'll be withdrawing an income of £40,000 per year. Another example is if your retirement pot is £750,000, you times this by 0.04 again, you will get £30,000 per year. And you could also do this with 500,000, times it by the same amount, and this gives you £20,000 per year. It really depends on you and how your lifestyle is. If you are able to live on 20, 30 or £40,000 per year, then that's how much your retirement pot needs to be. Now you might be thinking, if I have a £1 million retirement portfolio and I'm withdrawing 40 or 30k per year, then eventually it's just going to dry up and get to zero. This isn't necessarily the case. If you have your pension pot within a good index fund or a good retirement fund that is paying you at least 4% per year minimum and maybe even more, then that original pension pot amount should never ever actually disappear. Now, of course, I can't predict the market, and maybe at some point in your retirement, there might be a year where the stock market takes a really bad downturn. And that means that you'll have to withdraw from your original retirement amount. But that's the whole reason on why you want to try and get your retirement pot as large as possible, to shield you from any outside of events that just are out of your control. Now, if you're watching this video and you're in the slightly older age bracket, you might be thinking, well, nobody I know has £1 million in their pension pot. No one has 750, no one even has 500,000. And you'd be correct. For the older generation at the moment, the average pension pot, according to the Office of National Statistics, between the ages of 65 to 75 is only £145,000. And that's the total amount in the pot. Now, this is just due to the amount that they paid in for their entire lifetime in the 80s, 90s and early 2000s was much, much smaller than what the amounts are paid into today. Of course, just because the average salaries are much, much higher now than they was 30 or 40 years ago. And technically, on average, the pension pots of Gen Z and some millennials should be breaking into the 7 figures, or at least the higher 6 figures, just to sustain the lifestyle in the year 2060, 2070, 2080, because of course, things are going to be very expensive then. And this brings me over to the next point of, will the state pension actually still exist for Gen Z and millennials? So the current UK state pension is around £11,500 per year. This is basically less than £1,000 a month in payments for the pensioners that are currently withdrawing from the state pension. In some cases, this is even less depending on your living situation, but that's what it currently is. Now, I'm 23 years old and my expected retirement date is around the year 2069, 2070. Of course, I'm going to try and retire before that, but that's the estimated age. Now, this age does keep rising from 66, 67, 68 years old and potentially even higher for some of the Gen Z. It may even reach the 70-year-old age bracket. It means that the state pension today just will not be able to keep up with inflation. Even for the pensioners that are retiring in just 10 years, let alone 30 or 40 years, 11,500 or even maybe a little bit more will just be not even the bare minimum for living in the United Kingdom within the next decade or so. Things will just be way too expensive and it will be impossible to live on that amount. With already how much the government spends on the state pension, it's very unlikely with all of the millions and millions of people going into retirement that they'll be able to keep up with the younger generation being able to pay for the older generation. And I can't predict the future, but there could be the possibility that it gets scrapped, or potentially that certain things are paid for and the rest you have to pay for yourself. And that's why it's very important to build up your own personal private pension rather than thinking that the state pension is still going to be around in 30 or 40 years time and is going to help you, because the way things are looking, the reality of it is that it's not going to be there. Or if it is still there, you're not going to be able to pay the basics and bare necessities that you're going to need in retirement. This brings me over to the next point of how much does Gen Z actually need to retire? Now, we talked about the calculation in the previous one that £1 million pension pot will give you £40,000 per year. Now, £40,000 per year in the United Kingdom is just about above the average salary of £37,500 per year. Depending on which part of the country you're living in, £40,000 can stretch a little bit further outside of London, but inside of London can even feel a little bit squeezed even on that salary. Especially if you're not living with your parents or potentially a partner. If you're living alone and paying somebody extortionate rent here, then that amount is already very tightly squeezed. Now, I personally think that in the year 2070, when I'm an old age pensioner, I don't think that £40,000 is going to be enough, just because of how much more expensive things would have become in those almost 40 years. In just the 5 years that I've been working, I've tried to put in quite a large percentage of my salary into my pension pot, my private pension pot, and I've changed the index funds that it's invested into so that it can try and compound and become as large as it possibly can be. Now, my personal goal is over £1 million within that pension pot, and that will just be withdrawing about 50 to maybe 60k per year, depending on what amount it gets to. I think for most Gen Z and the prices of items and rent and general stuff in the year 2060, 2070, you're definitely going to need over £1 million in that pension pot just to be able to withdraw 50 to 60k per year. And this brings me over to the next point of actually building a retirement pot. And I think that this is really, really important for the Gen Z and young millennials out there, because one of the edges that we really have is first time and also access. Many, many years ago, if you look at your grandparents today, they just did not have the same access to the knowledge and information that we have today. It's so easy to just have a couple of taps on your phone to get investing or to change your pension pot. They may have paid into a pension for many, many years and it had just been in the default pension and had never really been changed. As well as this, retirement pots were not mandatory many, many years ago. I think even just as soon as the early 2000s that they became mandatory. So I personally think that the best way to build a retirement pot is to have a combination of a few things. Now, if you're working a regular job right now, 40 hours a week, and this is something that I personally do, depending on what your employer's pension match is, that you make sure that you match that because it's effectively free money. On top of this, if you're only meeting the bare minimum contribution of, let's say, 3 or 5%, then it is really good to actually make that 3 or 5% turn into 7 or 10% if you can afford it in your day-to-day life. Because with each and every payment that goes into your retirement pot, this is actually completely tax-free and pre-tax to your salary. Compound growth is the secret weapon in this scenario. The first 10 years of contributions in your retirement pot will compound massively as time goes on. Now here's a very quick example. If you're putting £500 a month at a roughly 7% growth rate per year, then you're going to be left with over £600,000 within that pot. And this is over 30 years. If you do the same thing over 40 years, this is not £600,000, this is 1.2 million. So you can see that massive difference of just 10 years that it can make. Many people that I know within my age group, they completely opted out of pensions because they need the money now. They may need the money now for paying off student loans, or they just want more money to spend right now rather than spending in retirement. For some people, it is crucial that they opt out of their pension to be able to gather that money. But if you really think about what you're going to be spending that extra money on within the first 10 years of your life, maybe it could be better put towards your pension. Alongside this, one of the things that not many people talk about building the best possible pension pot, is changing the fund that it's in. Now, when I first started my corporate job almost 5 years ago now, the pension that the money was going into was just in the default pot. Now, many people just get completely confused and don't really ever want to log into their pension to be able to change any of that, just because some of the providers make it really confusing and not very intuitive to actually change that pension fund that you're currently in. I would strongly advise that you go in and check where your money is actually being invested, because depending on your age, you could have hundreds of thousands of pounds currently sitting in your pension that's in the default pension pot. And this can actually lose you tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds in potential gains that are just lost because they are in really rubbish default pots. These default pots have billions and billions of pounds just sitting in them because nobody wants to actually change it. Now, I personally changed all of my retirement fund from the default pension into a BlackRock S&P 500 American market pension. I personally don't really want too much of my money sitting in UK stocks and UK bonds just because of how rubbish they perform. I want my money in American stocks that are going to perform really well over the next 20, 30, 40 years. I changed my default pension roughly around a year and a half ago now. And just in that amount of time, I've already doubled the amount of percentage that the default pension managed to get in the same amount of time in just 3 years. Now, of course, this could just be because of better market gains, but I'm willing to bet and risk effectively my pension money that over a long period of time, that S&P 500 market fund is going to perform very well. Now let's go on to the next point of some real life examples. Scenario 1 is a very lean retirement lifestyle. This is when you retire with your pension, but instead of living in the UK, you become frugal with your money and move abroad. It could be somewhere like Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, wherever it is very cheap. You will go there to live. Now, this can definitely be done on a pension of maybe 200, 300 or 400,000, just because your living expenses abroad are going to be much, much less. Scenario 2 is a comfortable UK retirement. This is having a £1 million pension pot in order to withdraw £40,000 per year. Now with this, if you haven't purchased a house, I think that you could definitely rent somewhere, maybe even some cheaper retirement living, and still have plenty of money on a monthly basis to be able to go out to restaurants on a weekly basis, to be able to afford and drive a car, and also maybe for 2 to 3 holidays per year. And then scenario 3 is a luxury retirement lifestyle. This is with 2 to 3 million pounds within your pension pot that you are able to withdraw 80 to 120,000 pounds per year. With this, potentially even in the year 2060, 2070, you could still live pretty comfortably, paying rent if you haven't purchased a house, or you could even take a lump sum and purchase a house with that amount. This could definitely be enough for you to travel multiple times per year also. Now this brings me over to the last point of some of the common mistakes to avoid. Firstly, this is having cash only saving. Now having a bit of cash on hand is always really, really good, whether it be £1,000 or whether it be £100,000. However, having too much cash on hand means that you are going to be losing money over the years. Just because your money is not going to be working within the markets or within bonds or even earning interest. Your money is just going to be sitting on a shelf for many, many years unless you spend it. And on average, that money is going to be losing about 2 to 3% of its value. The next mistake to avoid is waiting too long to get started investing. Now, I think that to have a happy and good retirement, you should have both your personal pension and also your regular investment pots, things like your ISA and invest account. This means that you can withdraw potentially even 2 incomes from those. But this is not going to happen if you wait too long to invest. A common thing that happens in the UK is that people finish sixth form at 18 years old, go to university, get into quite a lot of debt. They then get into debt for a car, and then they get into debt for a house. And there's just lots of debt wrapped around them from a very young age. So the immediate thing that they do is they spend all of their money and time paying off those payments, rather than trying to actually invest into the stock market or investing into themselves. Now, of course, going down that lifestyle is not a bad thing at all, but it's always best to evaluate how much can you really sustain of that debt on a monthly basis, and how much would it be better to put it into an investment account and compound that over the years. As I said before, the first 10 years of investing is going to give a really, really good compounding effect 20 or 30 years down the line. No matter what age you are never ever too old to start investing. People get to 30 or 40 years old and think, I've missed it, what's the point in investing? But that really, really is not the attitude. You still have many, many years to put your money to work in an investment account. Another mistake to avoid is ignoring inflation. Now, with all of these calculations, people often just ignore inflation and believe that the amount that they're calculating is for what they need today. With your calculations, they're never ever going to be perfect. But you need to try and think a little bit further into the future. Because yes, having £1 million in your retirement pot in the year 2025 and withdrawing 40 to 50k per year, you've got a pretty nice pension. However, is that going to be the same case in the year 2070? And will it be the similar case of today where £11,500 back in the 1970s or 80s would have been a great pension, or I should say a good pension, just because things were less expensive then than they are today. Potentially nobody back then in the 1970s, 80s who started their pension could have ever predicted that things are as expensive as they are today. And the last common mistake to avoid is thinking that the personal pension is enough. The personal pension just really isn't even enough today. However, if by miracle the personal pension is still around in 40 years from now, it just means that you'll have a nice little extra piece of income to be able to add to your personal pension and also your investment account that you are withdrawing from. Now, here's my final thoughts and some actions for you to take away. Retirement isn't about luck, it's about rigorous planning. And the number isn't fixed. You shouldn't plan for your retirement too early with trying to understand what that number may be. But if you're 10 years out of retirement, you need to be calculating how much you're going to be needing to survive on a monthly basis. Alongside this, your goalposts also move. Right now, you may be 30 years old at the height of your career and earning a lot of money. You may require a higher income just to support that lifestyle going ahead. But when you're in your 70s, you need to ask yourself, will you need that same level of income? Or it could be completely flipped and that you will need a higher income during that age just because you want to live and actually have some fun in your retirement. You want to be going traveling, you want to be seeing all different parts of the UK, and you may have a Rolls Royce that you need to pay your monthly payments on. Even if you can only save £100 a month into your pension, your future self will thank you. If you really did like that video, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and also give the video a like. If you didn't like the video, please give it a dislike, but tell me why in the comments. Tell me in the comments, how long have you been saving for retirement, and do you think that your pension pot is looking good? Thanks, and I'll catch you in the next one.